The summer crowds had already thinned when Michael drove north along the Oregon coast. It was the last week of August, that strange time when the air still smelled faintly of sunscreen and salt water. But the beaches were half empty, the kids were back in school, and the locals had begun reclaiming the shoreline. He was supposed to meet his younger sister, Leah, for a weekend getaway, their first trip together since their mother's funeral in February. The idea had been Leah's. She'd called him out of nowhere, her voice soft but oddly insistent. "I just need to get away," she'd said. "Just us. Like we used to." Michael pulled into the tiny rental house just off the dunes. Leah's car was already there. An old white Subaru with a surfboard strapped to the top. She was sitting on the porch steps, her hair whipping in the breeze, staring out toward the gray horizon. She stood when she saw him, smiling in that tired way she did when she'd been crying. They hugged for a long time. Neither of them mentioned the months of silence that had followed the funeral. Instead, they unpacked groceries, opened a bottle of wine, and talked about anything but the thing that still haunted both of them. The way their mother had walked into the freezing Pacific in January and never come back. The next morning, Leah suggested they walk the length of the beach. Cannon Beach stretched for miles, its sand pale and flat, the surf breaking in slow, heavy rolls. The tide was out, exposing tide pools and dark, jagged rocks slick with kelp. Fog drifted in and out, erasing the horizon, then revealing it again. They walked for an hour before Leah stopped abruptly. "Do you hear that?" she asked. Michael listened. At first, only the rhythmic crash of waves and the gulls' distant cries. But then he caught it. A faint, high-pitched sound, like someone calling from far away. "Probably just kids," he said. Leah shook her head. "It's two. I don't know. It sounds wrong." The voice came again, closer this time. Neither of them could make out the words. Leah scanned the shoreline, her expression tightening. Without a word, she started walking toward the sound. Michael followed reluctantly. They passed a scattering of driftwood, some of it stacked into crude shelters. The fog thickened, swallowing the world down to a few dozen feet. The call came again, sharper now. Michael felt the hair on his neck rise. They reached a stretch of beach where the cliffs pressed close to the water. The sand was littered with broken shells and bits of seaweed. And there, half hidden behind a boulder, stood a man. He was barefoot, wearing a tattered sweatshirt and jeans soaked to the thigh. His skin was pale and sunburned in strange patches, like he'd been out here far too long. He smiled when he saw them, but the expression didn't reach his eyes. "You shouldn't be here," he said. Leah asked if he was okay, if he needed help. The man ignored the question. He stepped closer, his bare feet leaving dark prints in the wet sand. "The tide's turning," he said quietly. "It always takes what it's owed." Michael felt something in his chest tighten. "We're just walking," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. The man's smile widened. "Walking where? You can't go back the way you came. Not now." Leah glanced at Michael, but before he could speak, the man turned and slipped into the fog toward the base of the cliffs. They stood there for a long moment before Leah said, "We should see where he went." Michael wanted to argue, but something about her tone made him follow. They climbed over slick rocks into a narrow gap between the cliffs. The air smelled different here, metallic, almost like blood. The gap opened into a hidden cove, its water dark and still despite the pounding surf beyond. At the far end was a cave mouth, black as oil. The man was gone. Leah stepped forward, her eyes locked on the cave. "Do you remember Mom's journals?" she asked suddenly. Michael froze. "What does that have to do with?" "She wrote about places like this. She said there were doors along the coast, and if you knew where to look." Leah's voice trailed off. Michael grabbed her arm. "This isn't the time." But Leah pulled away and walked toward the cave. He followed her inside, the darkness swallowing them instantly. The sound of the ocean faded. The air grew cold and damp. Michael could just make out Leah's silhouette ahead of him. She stopped suddenly. "What is it?" he whispered. Her voice was small. "There's someone in here." A figure emerged from the shadows. Not the man from the beach, but a woman. Her hair hung in wet ropes around her face. She wore a faded blue dress that clung to her body like she'd just come from the sea. Michael's stomach dropped. She looked exactly like their mother. Leah took a step forward, trembling. "Mom!" The woman didn't speak. She only lifted a hand and pointed deeper into the cave. Leah started toward her, but Michael grabbed her. "That's not." The woman's eyes shifted to Michael, and in that moment, he knew with a certainty that made him cold to the marrow. This was not their mother. But Leah wrenched free and disappeared into the darkness. Michael chased her, the cave twisting and narrowing until he could barely squeeze through. The air grew thinner, the darkness absolute. Somewhere ahead, Leah was calling his name. Or maybe it was the woman's voice. He stumbled forward until the passage opened abruptly onto another stretch of beach. One he didn't recognize. The sky was darker here, the waves higher, the wind sharper. Leah was nowhere in sight. He shouted her name, but the wind swallowed the sound. Then he saw them. Figures in the surf, dozens of them, standing waist-deep in the freezing water. They were all looking at him. One by one, they raised their arms and pointed to the sea. Michael backed away, but the sand beneath his feet was soft, pulling at him. The tide was rushing in too fast, the waves already breaking around his knees. He turned to run, but the cliff face was sheer. The water surged higher, knocking him off his feet. Salt burned his throat as he gasped. The last thing he saw before the wave took him was Leah, standing among the figures in the surf, her face expressionless, her eyes fixed on his. The next morning, the rental house sat empty. The Subaru was still parked out front, keys in the ignition. Their phones were on the kitchen table, along with an unfinished bottle of wine. Locals said the tide had been unusually strong that night. They said the sea had claimed more than one person over the years, especially those who wandered too far into the fog. But no one could explain why Michael and Leah's footprints led north along the beach and never came back. Or why, on certain foggy mornings, people swear they see two figures standing at the edge of the surf. A man and a woman, staring out to sea, waiting for something only they can see.